how you met Jack McCrae and how that partnership sort of came about?
Okay. How long do we have?
Well, we're good. We're good.
Okay. So I moved here in 1999. And for 2 years, as I mentioned, literally when we started, co-directing the arts management program, and hadn't really met a lot of people in the community. I was pretty much, sort of devoted and dedicated and committed to the job. And Marvin Delaney, Dr. Marvin Delaney, who was executive director at Avery, called me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, getting ready to advise a student." He says, "When you finish, meet me at Starbucks," when it was on Calhoun Street. And so we went to Starbucks, and he said, "I really would love it if you could come over to Avery and just kind of give it your arts management touch." He says, "I need someone to help me fundraise. I need a lot of marketing. We need to start a new newsletter. I need someone who can be a great liaison with our community Avery Institute, and just need some help." So he was, I think at the time, was going to go back to be the chair of the Department of Art History. So he continued to be executive director and brought me in as director. So I was really sort of the day-to-day person on the ground doing the work there. So I did that. I continued to teach. That was a full-time position, but I continued to teach one course or maybe even 2 courses in the arts management program. So I always kept my academic title and work with arts management. And so I did that. And Sylvia Gamboa, who was, I think, working with, I think she was director of summer sessions at the time, but she was also had gotten a grant from the Humanities Council of South Carolina to do a jazz retrospective. So she was sort of going around campus asking the English department, the music department, different departments to contribute in some way. And, there were, special topics courses that some departments would plan around the jazz age. And she came to me and said, "Would you do something?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, maybe this would be a good time I had seen the documentary that Beryl Dakers, a brilliant documentary that Beryl had done at SEE TV. And I said, maybe we could roll that out, and I asked staff when, we had shown that last, and it had been a while. And so I said, well, maybe we can do that. I said, "Yes, Sylvia, we'll do it." But in the meantime, I had probably, since I first moved, people would say to me, I would talk about my own interests in jazz, in music. Of course, they knew I was in the arts, and they said, have you met Jack McCrae? He's at the Post and Courier. And I said, "No." I said, "But, I've been reading, his these feature stories, and he's just a magnificent writer." And I said, I'd love to meet him. And I said, maybe with this event that I'm trying to have at Avery connected to this jazz retrospective, maybe we could meet. And so I called him up, and he says, a lot of people have been telling me, you should meet Karen Chandler. She's got some of the same interests as you. So we were both being told by people to meet each other. So we met. I'll never forget it. In the back, I can see it right now, in the corner at Surmet's.
Oh, yeah.
And Surmet's was, as you know, the go-to place. Thank you, Surmet. Mm-hmm. And we met for lunch, and we talked about all things Jack, all things Karen. I think it was like a 3.5-hour lunch. Mm-hmm. And he began telling me about Freddie Green and James Jamerson and Jabbo Smith and Cat Anderson. And I remembered, as he was talking for a long time, I remembered thinking, I haven't heard of these guys. I just, as a Duke fan, as a Basie fan, you know, I was a fan.
Right.
I listened to the music. I didn't think much about or know much about specific musicians who played specific instruments.
Right.
So I was not that sort of connected in that kind of way to jazz. I was an enthusiast, and I listened to jazz, listened to a lot of it. But I'm listening to him and I'm thinking, why don't we know about these guys? Later on, it was Chippy Hill. So, you know, because I'm digging to find, well, where I know there's some women in here somewhere. Right. So he said, you know, Karen, I'll help you with this event that you want to plan. And he says, let me get in touch with Quentin Baxter. Now, I had met Quentin. Actually, Quentin was one of the first people that I met along with Joy.
College connection, yeah.
Yeah, and because he was, I think that may have been his last year. Did he graduate in 98?
That sounds right, but
yeah.
But he was actually, he was teaching there before he graduated.
I know! So I think that's, well, I came in 99. But anyway, yeah. So it was the college connection, right. And anyway, so he says, "Well, I'm going to reach out to Quentin to see if he can put a band together." And I was like, "Oh, cool, that'd be great." And then I'll ask Lonnie Hamilton and Oscar Rivers and Bobby Ephraim and Raymond Redd. He started naming all these guys and telling me about their connections to jazz. In Charleston, and he got all of them on a panel, and I did a quick, you know, promotional piece that we sent to the Avery list, you know, because I'm there now at Avery as a director. And I mean, we promoted it fairly well, but not great. We didn't have any money to do a reception afterwards. And the day of the event, we go over he comes over to Avery, and we go upstairs to the McKinley Washington Auditorium on the 3rd floor. And so we're kind of deciding where chairs are going to be. And there's this guy in the back, and he's like setting up his video equipment. And so Jack looks at me, I look at Jack. He's like, "Did you like hire somebody to do this?" And I said, "No, I don't." "Did you?" He's like, "No." And I said, "Well, let's just go and meet him." And so we go in the back. And so he says, "Well, I heard about, and I saw this flyer about this event and thought that it was just, you know, much too important to not, you know, capture. And I'm sure you all probably have hired somebody." And we're looking at each other like, no, we hadn't hired anybody. And so he says, "Well, I'll video record it for you." And that was Tony Bell. So here are now the 4 principals, and then we bring you in, and Richard White and Kevin Hamilton, and later on Mark Sturbank and the whole gang connected at some point to what we call the Charleston Jazz Initiative. But the Charleston Jazz Initiative with Lonnie and that panel and Jack moderating and Quentin and you and Kevin and Rich. I think that was,
that's the 4.
And over 100 people. I say that because it was only supposed to be 99 people capacity in that place. And we were, as you remember, all over the place. And it was a magical evening for sure. And it was, as the researcher that I am, and Jack, people started raising their hands and saying, "Oh, my uncle played trumpet with the Jenkins Orphanage Band in 19 whatever." Right. And somebody over here says, "Oh, and my cousin played trombone, and my so-and-so." So all of these people in the room, this history is in the room. And I'm still relatively new to Charleston, because this is now 2001. I've only been here for 2 years. Right. And so, or no, this was 2003. I'm sorry, 2003. And so I don't know who everybody is. It's John Dash over in the corner talking about, you know, his brother
right.
You know, St. Julian Dash, tenor saxophonist for Erskine Hawkins. And I was and I was trying to write down names, asking people, who was that? Who was that? And trying to capture names so that we'd be able to go back at some point and ask them questions about their connection, not knowing, remember, this is just an event.
Just the one event.
Or this jazz retrospective that Sylvia Gamboa asked me to coordinate. And Jack said, yes, we'll do it. We talked with Trevor Weston, because Trevor was in the music department at the time. He was a professor there. And Trevor was connected to this because he was really interested in the classical end of things with Edmund Thornton.
African-American music or something like, yeah.
That's right. That's right. So he had been doing all this research on Edmund Thornton Jenkins, which was all connected. Anyway, all of this was happening all at the same time. And when that happened, at the end of that event, people came up to me and to Jack. We got home, we got messages on our phone. You all ought to do something, like start something to capture this history. And, you know, we were like, okay, we both have day jobs. We're gonna have to figure out how we do this. The next morning, and I remember thinking that night, and Jack and I talked like the next morning, and he says, we probably should kind of sit down to see what is possible. The next morning when I turned on my computer at the office at Avery, Mark Sloan, the director of the Halsey Institute of Contemporary Art, had been at that event that night with his young son. I think he may have been 7 or 8. And his neighbor, who was an Avery grad. And he wrote, which I still have, and it's a part of our archives, the Jazz Initiative archives at Avery. And you've noticed I haven't said much about Charleston Jazz Initiative because Charleston Jazz Initiative has not yet.
It's not formally, yeah.
Yeah. So he writes this letter to the president, I think the board chair, to all these people, VPs and deans, and I mean, it was just this long list of people. And he I can't remember exactly how he started out, but it was sort of like, you know, what were you doing last night? Here's what I was doing with my 7-year-old, you know, son and my, you know, 70-something-year-old neighbor who was an Avery grad. And he just talked about just how amazing and how much in that hour and a half, 2 hours, how much history was captured there, and how much of what we have all been living around and not knowing fully, and whose cousins and uncles and dads had been a part, and mostly men, had been a part of the Jenkins Orphanage band. But they just knew that their fathers were, you know, hired away from the Jenkins Orphanage band, and they were playing with this band called Basie, right, this band called Ellington. And they knew that that was, you know, pretty cool, but that sort of their story, their individual story, their dad's story as a part of this Charleston history, I think, you know, wasn't, you know, that important. But now someone is saying, but it is.
You know, and when I go out and speak to students and try to share all of the knowledge that I've gotten from you and from Jack and from, you know, Lonnie and George and Oscar and all of the hierarchy and all of that, I call them. I always, because New Orleans obviously comes up, and I offer a lot of the similarities to everyone and everything. But I also tell them that, you know, in New Orleans, you have that community that everybody knows so much about their history, and they all talk about it so much. And that's not been the case necessarily for Charlestonians. And the amazing stories that we have with, as we say, with our guys and our girls and everything. Why do you think that is about, just that lack of, knowledge, or at least it's out there, but it's just not talked about. Like,
yeah. I think it's, I think there are a number of things. I think with the Jenkins being the, that was the training ground.
Right, definitely.
It was a training ground. But I think, and I wasn't here, so it helps for George Kennedy, for Lonnie Hamilton and others to sort of bring some perspective to this. But the Jenkins was an orphanage.
Right.
And I think that while it was certainly respected here and around the world, and now I am understanding this as I continue to pour through records of Jenkins and reading more and more about that enterprise. But I really think it was, and I remember someone telling me this, that that they knew Jenkins was special and how it had taken in their dad, or taken in their uncle, but their experiences had been tough, because in many instances, as orphaned kids, that early on, we know that later Freddie Green studied music there, but he wasn't an orphan.
He wasn't an orphan.
I think that the difficult environment that many of them, Jabbo and Kat, grew up in, and being separated and orphaned from their families, from whatever tragedies or challenges happened in their family that brought them to Jenkins. I think that was sort of a tough world, and so I think coming to Jenkins was, for many of them, sort of a good rescue place that they were going to be able to seek solace, to learn how to, because many of them learned craft in a lot of different ways. There was a printing business, the first Black newspaper, Charleston Messenger, was printed from there. I think there was a shoemaking business and bakery. So there was so much there that they were able to, in fact, learn about and learn a craft. And some of them actually went on to establish businesses outside of the arts and music themselves. But I think their environment, the environments that they came from, but I also think that it just, in understanding the history of jazz in this country, Gunther Schuller, there have been a few jazz historians who've captured a couple of pages in their seminal publications about Charleston, and have not denied, its importance. But there hasn't been a lot that has been written about. And so I think it's probably a combination of those two things that it really took someone like Jack, a visionary who was from here, who knew, and he would even say he didn't know all of this that we've discovered as a part of the Jazz Initiative, and all the many musicians. We found a list, actually didn't find a list, but Wolfram Knauer, who was the director of the Jazz Institute in Darmstadt, Germany, when we first started, I'll never forget it. Jack reached out to, I think it was the Jazz Journalists Association, and Wolfram was a part of that group. Wolfram, very, very connected to the Jazz Initiative and to both of us individually. But he had been doing some research and sent this long list of musicians who had come out of the orphanage, because some of this had been researched early on by John Chilton, a British historian. Later, Jeffrey Green, who was a biographer for Edmund Thornton Jenkins. So there were a number of people on the ground here back in probably the late 70s. Beryl Dacre's documentary came out later, but there was enough of a nucleus of information about Charleston, about our gullah clap, that syncopated clap that is used in so much of the music of Ellington, especially. Yes. So I think for many, probably in Charleston, that connection wasn't made. It was kind of almost like my arts management practitioner, education, research, that pulling all that together kind of took somebody to pull it together who had that lived experience. Jack had that lived experience. And though he didn't know Wolfram Knauer and he didn't know that whole jazz scholarship piece in the academy, through the jazz initiative, we were able to pull all that together. And I remember Jack looking at that list that Wolfram sent, and he was like, wow, I had no clue. So even as the enthusiast and the scholar that he was about jazz in Charleston, he was blown away by some of the work that others had done. That's why when we started the Jazz Initiative, we said, it can't just be us. We've got to pull in Wolfram Knauer. We've got to pull in Dan Morgenstern, who was at Rutgers at the time. We've got to pull in Larry Ridley, bassist in New York. Was running the African American Jazz Caucus. A.B. Spellman, who was at the NEA at the time and was writing a lot of great poetry and was a jazz enthusiast as well. You know, we needed to Alvin Batiste when he was with us, the New Orleans perspective, that was hugely important to us. So we were pulling all of these folk together. Jeffrey Green was a part of that group. So with, us, all of us, and when I say all of us, I mean you and Quentin and me and Jack and the live jazz crew that was our nucleus. The community, because boy, John Dash and Roger, that Dash family, they helped us tremendously. The James Jamerson family, Anthony McKnight, and his brother Felix McKnight in Detroit. They were some of the first families because Jack and I both said, we've got to make these connections to families. And so they were able to give us these great, great, great stories. And I think many of them would say that they learned too. They knew, they knew about St. Julian Dash. They knew about their brother and how important his work was with Erskine Hawkins. But I don't think they had connected him to this larger world of folk who had done great things. I think all of us were learning about Charleston's jazz history at the same time, which was cool. So cool. As a researcher, creating all of this original research from some of the body of work that John Chilton and Jeffrey Green and others had started, and Alvin Batiste, was just great for us. So yeah, I think there were a lot of reasons why people just did not connect like those in New Orleans had. There was a marketing infrastructure in New Orleans that we just didn't have. I think the other thing, Charlton, and I know this is a long answer to your question.
Oh, that's all good.
But I think the other reason is that many of our guys left Charleston.
Right, okay. Yeah.
And never came back. And many of the folk musicians in New Orleans stayed and created that as a jazz city. So I think the oppression, the racial segregation, and the challenges and difficulties that brought on for our guys and our girls. I think that, because remember, they were leaving Jenkins in the 20s, many of them 20s and 30s.
Right.
But they were also a part of a New York jazz scene, and Paris and London, that that certainly was not here.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they came back for familial kinds of things. There are a number of people here who are relatives of Freddie Green, and they're like, yeah, he would stop back in for family reunions.
Did I ever tell you, it's funny that you say that. I've been the organist at St. Patrick Catholic Church, historically Black church downtown. But and I've been there. I've been associated with that church since 1995, something around there. But for a short time, for about maybe 4 years or so, I was the choir director at New Israel Reformed Episcopal Church.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I'm at the church, and one day I am in choir rehearsal, and I am sitting at the piano before choir rehearsal starts, and I'm just tinkling on it, and I am playing very slowly Corner Pocket. At church before choir rehearsal.
Tell them about Corner Pocket.
I'm playing Corner Pocket, and this is maybe the second year that I'm at the church, and the choir, they have a choir director, and she's very good, and she's just sitting on the pew waiting for everybody to come in, and she's watching me, and she says, where'd you learn that song? And I said, oh, well, it's just a really good bassy band standard. She says, yeah, I love my Uncle Freddie's song. And I went, what? You just said Uncle Freddie. And she said, yeah, that's my Uncle Freddie's song. And I said, like Freddie Green. And then that's when it hit me. Her family their last name is Green.
Yep.
She said, yeah, my Uncle Freddie, we all from Back to Green right over there. And and that's when I lost it right there. I almost canceled choir rehearsal to talk to them.
I love that story.
But just that thing about not knowing.
Yes.
And the family, there's that. She just never offered that up. They knew that I played.
Yep.
And they a couple of them had come to a couple of jazz performances, the few that I had during that time, because I really wasn't playing as much then. But she just threw that out there, and she said, yeah,
I love that.
Freddie's tune. And then shortly after that, and I just lost his name, but Freddie's younger brother. He has a brother.
Oh.
Was it Oscar or something? Anyway, he ended up coming home, and he was in the choir. And one day he said, oh yeah, I used to travel with the band all the time. And I said,
wow.
What? And I said, well, did you play? He said, no, I just carried my brother's instrument. And I went to Europe with them. I went all of these places with them. And I would just basically carry my brother's guitar case. And that was my job. And I got to see all of these great places and all of the world, and everything.
And I early on at that Avery event, after that event, and we had a few people who donated items to what would end up being
the archive,
a Charleston Jazz Initiative archival collection. And I have to say this. I want to make a connection to the story that you just made. The community called the Charleston Jazz Initiative into existence at that March 23rd, 2003 event in Avery. Okay. They did. Yeah. It just so happened that we were there to say, yes, we will participate and we will lead the effort. So I say that because that's what is so significant to me about what we did, Charlton, is that this was an initiative born of the community, called by the community, is the community.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talk about research, Charleston Jazz Initiative research, that story you just told,
Mm-hmm.
that's our research.
Mm-hmm.
When Jack went over to Carolyn Jabalile's White's mother's home to interview her, and she said, "Oh, I have a photograph you might want," and she goes back in her room, probably pulls something out from under her bed, and shows Jack this photograph that, scouring the internet, we've never ever seen before. You know, that's got her brother, who was a trumpet player, on crutches. This great photograph. The research that he got from that oral history, that photograph in her James Island home, that's our research.
Right.
Jesse Thrower came to me, I want to think about a month or two later after our Avery event in 2003, and he had heard that we were asking people for any memorabilia that they had on the Jenkins bands, on any of the musicians that came out of that band, came out of Charleston. And he had laminated, and so he blew up the obituary of Freddie and had it laminated. And he says, "I don't have much to give you, but I have this." And I was asking him, how did he know? So he's related in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Jesse Thrower is. And he says, "I remember when he would come back for family reunions." That's where I got that story from. He would say, I knew he was in the Basie band, but that was about it. What I knew, what was familiar to me about Freddie Green, who Basie hired, you know, who was with him for almost 50 years, right at 50 years. He says, what Jesse Thoreau said, what I remember about Freddie Green was him coming back for family reunions.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, that's our story.
Right.
That is our research. I mean, we can talk about, and scholars can write, and guitarists can write till they're blue in the face, and we need their scholarship as well about Freddie's technique
And brilliance, and just how
all of it. But boy, oh boy, when you add his coming home to Crab and coming home to family reunions,
mm-hmm.
and coming home to play on that golf course with Jack White, that's some stuff I will tell you. That is some research. And I got started with doing research with theater companies in the DC area. But I am telling you right now, as I consider retiring in the next couple of years, this research that we did with the Charleston Jazz Initiative, all we did was put the name on it. The community said it will exist. Mm-hmm. You all figure out how to do it. You know, they told us that night. You all figure out how to do it. And I told Jack, I said, okay, so with your jazz knowledge, my jazz interests, but also my research interests, right, and skill, I said, we can pull all this together, and Quentin and Charlton and all you guys as a part of the live jazz scene, that's got to be a part of this. We were like, okay, we got it. Let's call it the Charleston Jazz Initiative. And we did that in 2003 when this scene was quiet.
Right.
The live jazz scene, you guys were getting it going. But in terms of some understanding about the history, that was quiet. And then boom, you all, once we got the Jazz Initiative rolling, and then you all started meeting and saying, you know what? We need something called the Jazz Artists of Charleston. And all of a sudden, we had in this great city a jazz history research project about our history on this soil. And we had a presenting live concert now education angle, these two pieces. And you served as the founder and conductor, because we called it the Charlton Singleton Orchestra.
Yeah.
When we started, you
I
remember?
have y'all to thank for that. Actually,
That was Jack.
me and Jack over really over a beer. But
Yeah.
It was an event, I think, that that you all were doing with the
Yep.
hip parade.
Yep, that's right. South Carolina Hit Parade.
And Jack basically, on a set break at when I was playing at the Charleston Grill, he just walked over to me and he said, remember that conversation we had about doing a big band with some of the local musicians and some of the older cats? We had that conversation a little while ago. And I said, yeah, I remember. And he said, how fast can you put it together? And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, we've got an event coming up in, it might have been a month or so, like a month or two or something. He said, we've got an event coming up and we think that, having a band would be, the thing to headline this event. The event would be the concert.
Right.
So how fast can you do that? And I just got on the horn and called up some friends, and that was that hit parade. And so
2007?
2007, yeah, either that or early 2008, somewhere around there.
Yeah. I remember.
I think the first official Charleston jazz orchestra show, I think that was like a Christmas show, a holiday show.
Yes, it was. You know why I know that? I mentioned my cousin Brenda Key and her husband Wayne Brown. They were here. Okay. I think that was over the Thanksgiving break.
So that was 2008.
2008. I remember that. So yeah, so maybe the other one, the hit parade, was 2007.
Yeah, maybe late something. Yeah, that makes sense.
Late 2007, early 2008 could have been.
Right.
But I remember thinking how rich that was, that here this research jazz history thing that we're digging, finding information about, great stories, doing oral histories with people, how much of a theater that was to you guys, because we were hearing, I remember Dan Morgenstern kept saying, you all ought to check out was it Kat's arrangement of Them Their Eyes? I can't remember, but he wrote an essay about it. But he would, and Wolfram Knauer, they would feed us tunes that would feature our guys, or that would feature our rhythm,
right,
that we needed to check out. And I just thought, man, this is really cool that we've got these two entities, and Jack was the central figure for all of that to happen.
So now, you've got Avery going.
Mm-hmm.
You're starting up the Jazz Initiative, and you're teaching in the Arts Management Department at the College of Charleston, all at the same time. At some point.
Yes.
At some point, yeah. And is that department large per se at this particular time?
It has been our enrollment actually has just gone down just a little bit lately, but it has been a significant undergraduate program.
Right.
So I would say over probably the past 10 years or so, maybe 8 years or so, around 200 plus. So we peaked probably a couple of years ago, and we're back now to around maybe right at 200 majors. That's still a very large program.
Yeah, that's a good size.
Yeah, we're among the top 10. I think we're number 9 when President Chu came on board, and he was doing a little bit of research, and he had a PowerPoint that he was talking about, and he was showing the top 10 programs with the largest number of majors, and we're number 9. So yeah, very large program, undergraduate program, and we have a graduate certificate program. So Scott Shanklin Peterson, who many in the arts world will know very well. She was at the NEA. She was senior deputy director to, at the time, Jane Alexander, President Clinton appointee to the NEA, and Scott was right under her, and the culture wars that happened during the 90s. She was a part of, literally just managing that entire movement, and significant changes to grant categories and funding in the NEA. And so Scott was the former director of the South Carolina Arts Commission. She's from South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And her husband at the time, Terry Peterson, was working, I think, second in command under Dick Riley, Secretary of Education for the state of South Carolina. And so they both were, I know Scott was certainly retiring, and they decided to come back to South Carolina. And they were coming back, see, timing is everything. They were coming back as I was getting ready to leave to go to Avery, leave the co-directorship of the arts management program. And so we were able to convince Scott to come out of retirement to direct the program. So she came in as director of the program when I left to go to Avery, and directed that program for 11 years, and literally put the program on the map for us, both nationally and at the college. So it was during her tenure that the enrollment increased significantly. It was during her tenure that we started the music industry concentration, which has really skyrocketed a great interest for a lot of folk who are interested in the combination of music and music business and arts management. So she was a part of that. She decided to then retire again in 2014, and I came in as a director of the undergraduate program and graduate. But now I served 5 years in that capacity, and am now the director of our graduate certificate in arts and cultural management. We sort of re-envisioned the certificate program, tweaked some courses, added some new courses. And I added cultural into the name arts management, because it was important for us, being in a very cultural city, a rich cultural city is Charleston, that we not just think of training students, to do fundraising in a theater, but to also do fundraising, for a historic home, or to do fundraising at an African American gallery, or to work with a Jonathan Green to assist him in his collections. That needed to be a part of our offerings, and to distinguish the graduate certificate program from the undergraduate program.
Right. So now I only have like one or two more.
Okay.
I got asked a question shortly after all of the demonstrations started to rekindle, if you will. And someone asked me if, as an artist, have I changed my thought process artistically because of everything that's going on, and all of the new, new racial talks and everything that's happening in the world today. And I basically told them that, through the way that I perform, and the way and with the band that I play in, Ranky Tanky, which celebrates and talks about the Gullah community, and I said, well, Black artists have been talking about this and doing this for as long as it's been
Yeah.
as we've been performing or practicing our art. Do you think that anything will change in the management world? For everyone that's talking about things, or how they contribute to things, or how they look at things or present things?
I will say this. This is and feels like a different time. It feels like there will be some change. I think just as we witnessed the murder of George Floyd, we saw it with our own eyes. Everybody saw it all over the world with their own eyes. And I think what's happened with Black Lives Matter, who've been around for a while, not just in light of the recent murders. But I think that just, unfortunately, I think sometimes things like this have to have a tipping point. It shouldn't be, but it does. And I think that was the moment when people said, this, y'all, really? Mm-hmm. I mean, everything has got to change with the lens that we have been seeing ourselves in this place. Yes, I've been introducing African-American classical music. I've been studying it. We all have been engaged in this, and still are to this very day, in exposing much of what we do in the arts, exposing it to a larger world, the white world, particularly to our world, African Americans, but particularly to the white world, to say, these are our contributions. They need to be a part of your repertoire, Charleston Symphony Orchestra. They need to be a part of your repertoire, Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. They need to be a part of your exhibitions, Gibbs Museum of Art, Metropolitan Museum of Art. We've been saying that for years. I will tell you, when I got started, when I was at UVA in 1983, I was on a board. And I was the only Black person on that board. And what they wanted me to do was to help them determine classical orchestral compositions that they could program into their concert series. What I didn't know at 24, or maybe I was 25 at the time that I was on that board, what I didn't know was that while there may have been some who were genuinely interested in that, they knew they needed that in order to get grant funding.
Right. They needed
me on the board
get that
because
money.
NEA said, how many Black people y'all got on the board? How many other people of color are on your board? How much difference and diversity and how much of that, and in what particular ways? Through gender, through race, cultural differences. How much of that is on your board? How much of that is in your season? Mm-hmm. And so what I didn't know at 25, I learned quickly right. After that, that's what that was all about. Again, like I said, there was probably some genuineness to all of this. But the reality was nothing changed. And I said to a group of my colleagues at AAAE, I said, you know what? I entered this field talking the same thing I'm talking about now.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking the same kinds of things then that I'm saying now. And so to be 2 years from retiring and realizing that not much has changed, the makeup of boards in many of our arts institutions is still white.
Mm-hmm.
Still.
Yeah.
The staff in many of our arts institutions in this city and across the country still lacks diversity. When we have come through, what did we start first talking about? Multiculturalism. I think that was the word. And then I think we evolved to cultural diversity. And, you know, so we come up with these names. They all mean the same thing, and we just put new names on them. But the practice has really not changed at all. And to have been a part of this arts management world, both on the practitioner side and on the education and research side, I thought about that when I only saw that video, because I couldn't look at it again, George Floyd, and I thought, ooh. So in my world, not much has changed. In our world as Black folk living in this space, not much has changed. But there was something that I saw in the movement of young people throughout the world. Started here in Charleston. I know a lot of those young people. One of them is a former student of mine, Cody Dixon. Mm. I just saw something different, Charlton. And I think that we are at a new day. And I do think young people are going to, Cody had started an after school program. You know, I asked my faculty, let's help him fundraise. Let's help him get money. I know what it's like to try to start something and not have the money for it. He sat in my fundraising class and learned how to do it. The least I can do is give him some money for the GoFundMe thing that he's got, page that he's got, tell other people, and see whether or not we can support him and as many other of our students and those around this country who are trying to do what we were not able to accomplish. So I really think that it's going to be many of the young people who are going to be able to take what we have started and move forward, and some who are going to envision very, very new ways of interacting with lots of different types of institutions. But I think things will be significantly different. In my own program, you know, right after, you know, everybody was writing these statements and putting them on their websites, and we came together several times. We have a list of readings. Everybody's reading through the summer. And what we're going to do, actually starting the fall, is how to incorporate anti-racist perspective into our classes. So, you know, there's always been a diversity, inclusion, and sort of equity component to all of our classes that's sort of meshed into each one of the classes. But we need to now put a new lens. We need a BLM. We need a Black Lives Matter lens on our curriculum. So it's going to take work. And we said, you know, you guys, we're not going to do all this summer.
Right.
Right. You know, we need to read. We need to learn. We need to be trained. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not about reading a book on how to be an anti-racist. and
Right.
then somehow you're going to magically put it into a curriculum and teach students. So, this is a long process, but we have said to each other that we are committed to it. And I think what was different, I know for us, and I encouraged those that I was in contact with as everybody was writing support statements, was I said, I why don't we do this? I wrote the last statement and we all kind of chipped in. So I'm not going to write it.
Wrong.
I'm not going to write it.
Mm-hmm.
I need you, Chris Burgess, you, Heather McDonald, you, Claire Long. I need you to write it.
Right.
And then I'm going to look at it.
Right. But that's a
But
different.
yes, and that's it. And I think what we have been doing is we have been saying in the arts, okay, let's get Karen on this board. Let's get Karen on that board. Let's get, Charlton on that board. Let's get Quentin on that. And then we do the work. Ain't doing the work no more.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been doing the work. I did the work since 1979. I did the work since 1979 and nothing has changed. I'm about to retire in 2 years. So obviously that didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to be in places where we say, no. Don't keep giving these grants to the same big ass institutions.
Right.
How is Cody Dixon's after school program going to be able to get off the ground? And you keep funding that there is a mechanism, there's a funding infrastructure nationally that's going to keep his after school program,
Mm-hmm.
Pure Theater,
Mm-hmm.
all these great institutions at the same level.
Yeah.
Can't do that anymore. That infrastructure is not going to get us to where these young folk with Black Lives Matter need us to be. That's why I said the whole thing. I'm getting ready to read Eddie Glaude's new book on sort of his perspective on. It's right in my bedroom, and I'm forgetting the title. But he's taking James Baldwin and just kind of using a James Baldwin to. I think it's How to Begin Again. Or To Begin Again. And I haven't started reading it, but the premise is, we've got to, this thing hadn't worked for us, and
Right.
we've got to start anew.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, I do feel yes. I know AAAE now has it's for its first Latinx executive, chair of the board. And so we're excited about, and she's excited about new directions in terms of our anti-racism perspective, and the centralness of it in our work with arts management programs, undergraduate and graduate, all over the country. So, we know that we have got a lens, an important lens, and we've got the vehicle to be able to do it. So I'm excited about working as a board member with that organization with them. I think we're about to chart new ground, both in our academic institutions and in institutions within the industry. We've just got to make sure that we say to those who are in charge, not only continue to do what you said you were going to do, to that support statement that you wrote that everybody was writing, a couple of months ago, stick to it. We've got to have young people in and on these boards, or creating new types of ways to support efforts that are happening in our community. But they need to be at the table when funding decisions are being made. They need to be grant reviewers, helping to give away some of this money at the national, state, and local levels. So I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that we're about to see some changes.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, I appreciate you taking all of this time. I know that your schedule is pretty hectic nowadays and going through some changes and everything. So I really appreciate you doing this. I love you dearly.
No, I love you too, Charlton.
All of the lessons that you have given me that you probably didn't even know.
And that you've been giving me. We're all learning and doing together. That's what's so beautiful about it. I love you, Charlton Singleton.
Love you back. Dr. Karen Chandler, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And I hope everybody's enjoyed this session. And we look forward to other sessions such as this. Once again, this is Charlton Singleton, Artist in Residence Emeritus at the Gilliard Center. And we thank you.
I get scared sometimes.
But as I always say,
it's okay to be afraid.
as long as you face the fear.
And keep moving forward.
Wherever you are in life, count on the name trusted in insurance for over 70 years. BlueCross BlueShield of South Carolina.